Right there. Look at that right there. Look at that head shake, man. Oh, man. That's what we came up here for.
Okay, live in 3, 2, 1.
Muskies, that's what we get to talk about. We both love chatting about that. How you doing, Doug?
Good, yourself?
Yeah, great, man. Well, thanks for showing up here. If folks are not familiar, Doug Wegner is an amazing muskie angler. You've got a YouTube channel, a guide business, a number of different things, and you fish for muskies in a lot of different places. Why don't you kind of run through your season for us?
Yeah, fortunate to do so. I start my season in Green Bay, which is kind of what I would consider my home waters of Green Bay. We have an opener right at Memorial Day. So start there in the spring. We got a pretty good spring window for about 2 weeks, depending on our water temperatures, warm or cold spring. And then from there, go to Minnesota. Now I do it just basically for 2 weeks or a week and a half, depending where the Canadian muskie opener lines up, and then run to Canada, fish Canadian opener, generally through the end of July into August, and then run back to Green Bay for, let's say, our peak muskie summer window, which is basically August and September. And then come that time period, like that middle of September, end of September, I'm kind of just done guiding for the season. I go back to my place up in Canada on Lake of the Woods and fish there till it freezes and bounce around a couple different lakes. And we fished eagle together in the fall and bounce around in Northwestern Ontario, and just get to, it keeps it fresh for me. I gotta move around, otherwise I get bored. And keeps it fun.
Yeah, man, that's a pretty good little route that you've got there, I would say. So you get to encounter some big ones. So in your travels, and we were talking about last year, you traveled out east muskie fishing, but you've got Great Lakes muskie experience, the Wisconsin thing, the Minnesota thing, and into Northwestern Ontario. Have you noticed anything different about muskies where they live? Or, I mean, is there something regionally specific to them? Do they all pretty much act the same, or are there little nuances to different bodies of water?
There's definitely nuances. I mean, even Northwestern Ontario, I mean, you can talk about Northwestern Ontario, but every lake in Northwestern Ontario fishes a little bit differently. And a lot of factors go into that. But yeah, there's definitely differences between, like, your Great Lakes strain, your Leech Lake strain, your naturals up in Northwestern Ontario, and then the little bit of fishing I've done out east. They definitely all act similar, but there's definitely points or things that each strain does differently or area does differently for sure.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of Canada, we both love fishing up there. It's my favorite place on planet Earth, is Sunset Country, Northwest Ontario, and muskie fishing up there is so cool. But you're right, Lake of the Woods fish is different than Sewell, and Sewell is different than Eagle, and Eagle is different than Wabigoon. And even though there might be places on those bodies of water where they look similar, the habitats are slightly different, and the fish just seem to be, to me, it's hard to put in words in many cases, but they're just for
sure.
Different.
Then there's so many different like the beauty of Northwestern Ontario is, like, a lot of those big, the big ones that we talk about are like the big three, obviously. Most of them each almost basin fishes differently.
Yeah.
And then there's different lakes inside of a lake where you have, like, the trout water in Eagle Lake and the trout water on Lake of the Woods, and versus the shallow, dirty, stained stuff, or like different sections of the lake. It's so cool how these systems are generally, river systems are somewhat of a flooded flowage system per se, and they kind of filter out as they go through, and there's just so many different factors that go into even which part of the lake you're going to fish, let alone just the lake itself. So it makes it really cool and unique, and I'm the same way. Like Northwestern Ontario, I've traveled around enough between the Midwest and Canada, and even the out east stuff, and still the place that feels right, or the place that feels like home, is definitely Northwestern Ontario.
Well, the habitat is just
so
spectacular.
Amazing, yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. If you've never, what I love about it, I'm sure you do too, it's like, oh, that looks cool over there. Let's go try fishing there. And it's, the magic is revealed, and how the spots are laid out, and the habitat is just so cool. You're engaged the whole time when you're there. It's not like fishing probably Green Bay or a western Minnesota lake where, this weed bed's 2 miles long, and you're just going. It's like, okay, there should be one right off of there, and it's great.
Yeah, it's really unique, and the exploring factor is such a thing for me. Just always working in new spots every single day, and if you want to go fish new spots all day long on those systems, you can. There's lifetimes of water on Lake of the Woods. If you can't fish all of Lake of the Woods in a lifetime. You can't fish all of Eagle Lake in a lifetime. Like, you can get as close as you want, but to truly know it and understand it really well, that's what makes these places so special, is that if you just want to get off the beaten path, get off your milk run. You can go explore stuff, look at an island, say that looks good, and generally have some kind of success with it. And that's just what makes that whole entire place so special. And we often just end up talking about the big three, right? But there's so many other little puddles and stuff off the road that you don't know what's in them, and I'm gonna find out at some point. I mean, someday I'm gonna expand out more and more, and that's my goal right now in my fishing, is just to run my business and everything else. But any free time I can wedge in there is to go and fish something new or something different, or something I've always wanted to do. Right, this bucket list per se for me, and my bucket list is basically Northwestern Ontario. Right.
That's cool. Well, I agree with you, and that's one thing I think anglers should consider is when you're fishing shield water, it can be really intimidating because a lot of it is big, it's vast, it can be overwhelming with the amount of habitat, but you might get tipped off on, here's a really good community spot where you should start and get a little confidence there. But one of the things that I've learned over the years is when I would first go to or earlier on, is like, okay, I had confidence in this spot, but then I saw a muskie 4 miles over here on this spot, and then I know, there's another spot 6 miles over here where I saw one. I would make these, runs to these areas that I had confidence in. But by the first spot, within eyesight, there was like 18 other spots that looked really cool. And however, having spent enough time up there in some of those areas, you're like, well, all 18 of those spots can actually be good spots. And so you don't have to always be running. And sometimes if you fish 3 or 4 spots in an area, maybe it's worth moving on and checking another basin, to your point. Or if they're moving, a lot of times don't waste gas.
Yeah, don't waste the time. It's not even the gas. It's just the time. Time's more valuable than any amount of gas, right? Or any dollar amount in gas. But it's so fun. And honestly, like, you can have your 3 spots, you think like, oh yeah, these are the spots, and then you kind of venture out. Well, you might find that actually this and this is the spot, versus you've been driving past it for how long. But when a lot of people are constrained to their week-long vacation or their one trip for the year, and it comes down to confidence and being willing to maybe go outside your comfort zone or fish new stuff. But there's so many times where the basin thing is a big thing for me. Finding the basin that's hot, I would say, and that can change from week to week. I get lucky enough to be there for a long period of time, but you can see if you can find a hot basin, it'll stick around for a while, and then eventually if I'm just really frustrated in an area, it's finally like, okay, like we're making a big move, right? Like, we're not going to fish these 18 spots. We're gonna drive the boat a half hour and just start fresh. But you can do that there, right? Whereas that might require you to put the boat on the trailer in a lot of other places. Yeah,
that's such a great point. Is that this isn't like Midwestern fishing where this lake is bad, so it's trailered to another lake. It is. They are absolutely different lakes. And do you look at these basins and just are you looking at primarily the depth of the basins as kind of your indicator of like, okay, if this is a moderate depth one, maybe I should go to a cooler, deeper basin or a shallower one? Or how are you kind of judging if this one's not hot? Where are you making that?
So I as far as I think what you're talking about is like, how do you break down a big giant lake into other sections, right? It's like, how do you break a basin out of something else? And I wouldn't even say, we say basin, thinking like a general deep water area, but I would almost consider a basin. If you could imagine, maybe the lake drops 15 or 20 feet, where would different lakes be broken up into? And that could a lot of times be current too, right? Like even a string of islands, in my opinion, can sometimes break up a basin, right? So it's current, maybe it's current driven, maybe it's, if a certain basin sets up better for an east wind or a north wind or a south wind or west wind, whatever it might be. So it doesn't necessarily have to have that really deep center to it, where we call it a basin, right? But it's maybe a lack of a better word for just a section of the lake, right? And if you can try and break up this big, immense body of water into different sections, we call it a basin, but it's almost finding that hot section of the lake and where that is. And I definitely find myself breaking it down more off of either watercolor, I would say, more so than depth, and then maybe, like I said, if you can drain the lake 15, 20 feet, what would you have for, a lake, right? Or a lake here, a lake there, obviously. And then with the higher water, you can just drive over to the next lake, right?
Yeah, that's a really good way to break it down. Switching gears here a little bit to baits, and I always get new ideas for baits from you and Luke and whoever else, because you guys are always trying everything else. But one thing that I've noticed to be really common when fishing with you is that you're not messing around with small stuff. Like I showed up on Saturday. I don't musky fish every day like you do, but I've got some little bucktails, a couple little gliders, more small to moderate sized baits, and like, boom, you guys are, you and Kyle are throwing big ass lures, on open. And so that really goes against a lot of traditional thinking, but clearly it works. So is there ever a time, do you buy into this small bait early season thing? Cause it sure seems like you're
100%. It's different because we're in Minnesota, right? So like there's a different mentality, I think, among the fish that allow you to fish bigger. Whereas like where I just came from in Green Bay, like we're throwing little single number 7 bucktail, like right up your alley, right? Like the stuff you had twisted up would be great. And that's what I was just throwing 2 weeks ago. But it seems like the Minnesota fish just have a different mentality, especially on Mille Lacs, where we were at. The fish have a different mindset, and they're not scared of those larger lures, I would say, as much as some of our Green Bay fish where I just came from. And even in Green Bay, there's definitely locations in the spring on the bay. Like we have so many different spawning bays and tributaries and stuff where our fish set up. There's definitely certain places where the fish are willing to feed on larger lures, where I can get them to bite bigger stuff in the spring. And it's more so just based off of the forage that I think they're more used to eating. Our further north basin, or further north, I'm talking basins, tributaries and spawning bays are definitely, those fish I think are a lot more accustomed to eating whitefish. A lot more whitefish throughout the summer and into the fall. Whereas our lower bay fish, a lot of their forage is more perch and shad, a lot of smaller bait fish. So I definitely feel like in the spring I can get away with throwing larger lures in my further north tributaries and spawning bays than I can in the south end of the lake. But as far as the Minnesota thing, like it just seems like these fish are willing to bite something big. And the biggest thing is too, like the amount of pressure, the boats that are around. Most people are throwing, your accustomed smaller spring stuff. And if you try and want to stand out and do something different from, the rest of the crowd, which Minnesota is all about being different. If that's what I've learned, one thing about being in Minnesota is like, it can be a small detail or a large detail, but being different to a Leech Lake strain of muskie is very, very crucial versus in Green Bay. I feel like it's much more, you have to kind of go with what works and don't vary too far off of that, because when the window opens, and it can be for anywhere else, like 5 casts, right, 10 minutes, you don't want to be throwing something so far off the wall that you miss your opportunity. So I've definitely learned, different lures or strategies as far as like bait choices or selections, depending on, where I'm fishing, if it's Green Bay or Minnesota or Canada, stuff like that.
How does Canada fit into that? That's a really cool way of thinking about it. But how does Canada fit in?
Canada's interesting because I would say the Canadian fish, for the most part, act a lot more like your, Wisconsin, almost inland Wisconsin strain of muskies, I would say. And inland Wisconsin muskies are definitely where I've focused the least amount of my attention in the last 10 years. But I used to fish them, a lot, right? I grew up in south central Wisconsin and fished a lot of our inland lakes. We had, standard Wisconsin strain fish. And those fish and the Canadian fish act very similar. They're very, they're not happy when a cold front comes into town, right? They're not, Minnesota fish and Green Bay fish, a cold front doesn't affect them nearly as much, I would say. But those Lake of the Woods fish and the northern Wisconsin fish, a cold front can just shut those things at the wrong time of year, right? I mean, leading into fall, it'd be a different story. That can fire them up, but the rest of the other 2/3 of your season, it can really just shut them down, and then they get really finicky and fickle. I would say, but I definitely have favored, at least in the spring and summer on my Canadian lakes, definitely smaller. We kind of go in with that. You could almost call it a trend in muskie fishing right now. Is definitely some smaller lures, and I'm kind of feeling that same way with the Canadian stuff to an extent, right? There's always, my lead bait in the boat is always something that varies, favors the smaller side of things when it comes to Canada, I would say.
Well, we're talking about how you set the boat up. So being a professional guide, you're often fishing 3 anglers. What is your strategy with how those baits move through a spot, especially if you're not, fishing a flat with anglers thrown on both sides of the boat where, it's going to be 3 lures coming through? How do you stagger the baits? And let's just say this is midsummer. We're talking, July, August, early September type of thing.
For sure. Yeah, I try and keep it somewhat simple. And if this is if I really haven't established a pattern, right? Like we're not on a bucktail bite, we're not on a specific topwater bite. Like if we're trying to establish a pattern or going through the day to day to kind of check our bases and really mix up what's going on in the boat. Number one, tried and true, is Musky's favorite food, a bucktail, baby, right? That's my favorite Jeremy line. A Musky's favorite food is bucktail. Bucktail's always in the one hole in my boat. If you don't like to throw a bucktail, you probably are not going to be in the front of my boat. If you don't want to make that decision, that's fine. You can fish second water. That's fine. But then from there, second water for me is generally, you're talking a Shield Lake, going to be some kind of either crankbait, right? Crankbait, or if somebody's willing and able, even some rubber stuff in the 2-hole. But kind of either one of those two options, and then generally either myself or my third angler in the back of the boat. You kind of are stuck with, you can kind of do whatever you want in the back, I think. But what I really like to fish in the back is either rubber or topwater. I like to keep the topwater in the back of the boat. It doesn't slow the rest of the anglers down. If your one hole guy's throwing topwater, you can't cast over him at any point, right, due to his retrieve. So either if the guy in the front of the boat wants to throw topwater, you have to make sure you're way ahead of the boat and you're not slowing down, the angler behind you. But topwater fishes really well out of the back of the boat. Generally fish a lot slower, and then or the rubber stuff where you're going to gain a lot more depth. And reason being for those, that pattern is your bucktail is going to pick up your hottest, most aggressive fish, and it has the highest hooking percentage out of anything, right? Bait's coming in at a steady speed, right? You can pick up your speed obviously as you come in, but for the most part the bait's traveling in a straight line at a somewhat steady speed. The fish can key in on it and they can attack it and they get a really good shot at it, and it just has a high hooking percentage. It's wire and hooks, right? Whereas your crankbait, generally can somewhat, hopefully a little bit of bottom contact, but then also you might be twitching it and popping it and have some pauses mixed in there where the bait's a little bit more erratic. Dive and rise lure can fit really good into that 2-hole as well, your Suic or bar fight or stuff like that. But anything that's somewhat of a stop and go, but has a rise to it on the pause or even a suspended piece to it, is really key for me. But at that point, you're making bottom contact, which is great. You can fire up a fish or trigger a fish in that way to engage with the lure. But then, you're running the risk of that fish maybe not getting the best shot at the lure due to the erratic retrieve of the bait itself, right? The twitches or the pauses or the rise or the darting of the lure, whatever it may be. And then the back of the boat, throwing the rubber in the back, I'm definitely the most likely to get snagged, but generally I know the spot the best as far as how deep I can run my bait, how far off the bottom I can be, where I can be, because I don't want to make any bottom contact in the shield. You just run the risk of getting snagged, obviously, and then bringing your whole show to a halt. But I like to throw the rubber in the back. I love that the fall of rubber. It's really, really special to me. It's definitely a trigger for muskies. That fleeing fish back to the bottom, back to their safe space, is something that Hoyer taught me a long time ago. And I've always kind of kept that in the back of my head. But having a lure that falls is a big trigger. But then with rubber comes the lowest hooking percentage out of all of those baits that we've talked about, just due to the fact they can sink their teeth into it. It's harder to move it. Again, the pull pause factor of it. They can miss the lure in the front, too far forward, too far back. And then the top water kind of fits into the back for me, just because you have to fish it so slow is the biggest thing. If you really want to do it effectively, you got to fish it pretty slow. It can be somewhat of a tough hookup percentage, and anglers really have to get into the habit of letting the fish, take it down and not pull it out of their mouth. And you really have to really calm down. And topwater follows. There's really nothing calm about a fish rolling up on a topwater, right?
Easier said than done.
Yeah, if they just go up and shark it, that's one thing. But when they put the whole show on for you, you get fired up and excited, and you really gotta tone it back. But that's how I like to run my boat, in the summer.
Well, there's a ton to unpack in that statement, so I kind of want to continue on that line. Is there anything, you mentioned the topwater being in the front for obvious reasons, slowing everybody else down, but are there other baits that you would recommend to people to not have be your lead baits, or because there's obviously a system, there's a reason for what you're doing.
100%. Yeah, the big no-nos for me in the front of the boat is going to be like a Suic. For me, if you want to find a muskie, if you want to know if there's a muskie living on a spot, a Suic I think is the best. They love to look at Suics, and they're great at catching fish. Don't get me wrong, but to fish a bucktail behind a Suic, your bucktail guy, good luck, right? Like, I hope you can cast further than the Suic guy. That's about your only opportunity, unless you can really trigger him with speed. but I definitely don't want to fish a bucktail behind anything other than a topwater. A topwater is the only thing I would fish in front of a bucktail and feel okay about it. But big no-no for me would be like a suic or even your rubber stuff in front of it. The one bait I didn't touch on, and it really gets categorized into rubber, but in my opinion, it's not the way a lot of people fish it. It can be, you can put it in two different categories depending on how you fish it, but it is a swim bait. Your swimming dogs or stuff like that. So if you're fishing a swimming dog as a straight retrieve lure, my buddy Jeff calls it the rubber bucktail.
Sure.
You cast it out, you reel it in, right? And that can be a really effective lure, right one hole behind the bucktail, in my opinion. A swim bait's a great two-hole bait, especially those fish are really keyed in on more of that straight retrieve style. I love the belly roll. I'm a sucker for swimming dogs, but I love the belly roll. They're a little bit more subtle, but love that.
Are you using the original or the shallower one?
So for straight retrieve, I definitely like the shallow, the more round one.
Yep.
For straight retrieve. Now, a swim bait also can go into a pull pause category, or what I would call a rubber category. If you're going to fish it pull pause, more like your dog or your deuce or your tube, stuff like that. So that bait can kind of go each way depending on how you're fishing the lure. But that's a great bait to throw, in the two hole behind a bucktail as well.
If you're doing that pull pause on a swimming dog, are you adding weight?
100%.
Yeah. So you want a little bit.
You want
faster nosedive.
You need the tail roll on the fall. Is what you need, and that's where the swimming dog really comes into play, is because it has such a softer tail than a lot of the swim baits on the market. Where on a slackline fall, that lure actually has the lure has no action outside of its tail, so you need the tail to roll and feel that little bit of thump in your rod tip as that bait's falling, versus a lot of the other some of the other swim baits in the industry. They have such a hard tail that they don't get that roll on the fall, and sometimes you have to add almost too much weight in order to get that tail to flutter on the fall.
Yeah.
So there's a sweet spot. The chaos weight, the chaos chin weights. Huge fan. Love those things. I put them
those
on.
things are sweet.
Put them on everything, right?
You running an ounce and a half, the big one, or you?
I have all of them, right? Halves, ones, ounce and a half. All depends on the lure and the situation, the depth we're fishing. But that's a great, all around the board weight. And then I fish a lot of the Musky Innovations heavy heads on my dogs. For
Yeah,
sure.
and those are the ones that go under the chin and.
Yeah, the wire comes up over the nose, and I love.
Did you just flip me off?
Yeah, kind of right there.
So, all right, too many questions.
Quit
for Doug.
getting
He's
into the
giving it all
details,
up.
Jared. Jeez.
Oh man, enough's enough, man.
Skinning
all
me
right.
over here.
Well, I know you put a lot of fish in the boat on rubber bait, so we'll end it there. We didn't touch on tubes because I know you do hammer down on tubes, so we don't have to go there, but just know that Doug's a tube man. Tubes work really good for muskies. I wanted to talk more about crankbaits because I love throwing crankbaits, especially on the Shield, and it is a really fun bite when you get to drive grind a crankbait into some rocks and kind of feather it down there. And so a couple of my favorites, and I want to see where you go from here, are one. I was a big fan of the Storm Giant flat stick, but I love a Grandma's as one of my crankbaits. But the other one that I always have on in Canada is a jointed depth raider, perch jointed depth raider. I just love that bait. If it's tough bite, you can just walk it down those rock reefs, and you get lots of bites when you're lifting it up by the boat and you get the 5-gallon pail. It's super cool. So what are a couple of your kind of go-to?
Cranks, yeah, I would say I'm more of a straight minnow style lures. 7.5-inch Grandma is a really good one for me. There's really 3 minnow baits that I fish. It's a 7.5-inch Grandma, like a Triple D or a Rachel, right? Either one.
Yeah.
And then the other one for me is a 9-inch shallow raider. Like that bait for me has done a lot of really good stuff, and they're all kind of different in their own aspect. But the biggest thing for me, and I think all the baits you listed too, and you have to. Let's be honest, we got to put a super shad in there.
Yeah, super shad's pretty deadly, man.
Stupid shads are they're wicked. But they're I'm casting them more and more because they are such a good lure on Lake of the Woods. But I was always so against it because I fish them for so much of my season back in Green Bay. But I'm working them more into the system. But if you look at those lures, everything that you listed is a round lip, which aids in figure eights. And the one thing with the 9-inch shallow raider is that it's a square lip, which makes them a lot harder to figure eight. They're a lot more likely to blow out, right? Say in the corners, because figure eighting is such a big game for us, Northwestern Ontario. But the amount of water that a square lip crankbait pushes, I think is what really makes it special. And I lean on that one a lot more when it's, big waves, 2-3 foot waves. I'm generally going to grab that, the bigger square bill 9-inch shallow rater that's really going to throw a lot of water and push a lot of water. The Triple D or the Rachel for me is kind of that in between moderate one where it still has the rounded lip. It's got a really good dive curve to it, right? Can get down, but then the suspending factor is huge, right? It's killer. Just such a trigger for all species, and muskies are no different. And then the Grandma is just such a great twitch and lure, in my opinion. They can walk really nice, and there's that new Kramer bait that's coming. I'm
Yeah, that looks
stoked
super
about.
awesome.
It's got a really good build on it. I love the swing in the back, a lot like your Mega Bass stuff. And then the round lip, right? It's just huge. I know it's going to figure eight good. So I'm stoked about that as far as like a new bait that's coming. But a lot of those, crankbaits for me, I really want them to have a round lip if I can get them to have a round lip.
That's super cool, and I'm guessing a lot of people aren't thinking about it. It's a flat-sided crankbait, whatever, same thing. But you do notice it. Like you're saying, and you're going on the corners. That's a big deal. So knowing what's moving water, and obviously the trade-offs with the the big shallow invader versus rounded one.
Yeah, and that I love shallow invaders too, but the invaders.
I'm sorry, shallow raider.
Shallow raider, yeah. And the invaders are great too. But
yeah, they are.
They are a square. Then they're a cool hybrid with the rubber tail. They're just they can be a little bit. I don't know. I see a lot. They're like a suic for me. If I need to see a fish, an invader's a great bait to see a fish with. Yeah, cranks are cool. I got away from cranks the last few years, and then last year they kind of came back in. I had a really good week to 8 days on a Grandma. That was pretty special.
That's super sweet. Yeah. While we're talking about cranks, and you talked about super shads, we're gonna switch geography, going back to Green Bay, and we talked about this earlier, that a lot of people, I believe, have this idea that musky fishing on Green Bay is trolling, which it is, but I know you guys do a ton of casting. But I'm more so interested in the technical aspects of trolling for you guys out there. I mean, if you're coming from Minnesota, the only way you're putting more lines out, is to, hey, let's bring the kids, let's bring Grandpa, let's load everybody up to get a big spread of lines out. Yeah, where you guys get to fish multiple lines. So how do you approach a big spread like that on Green Bay?
Yeah, we're a unique place in the fact that we get to run 3 lines per guy, right? So there's a minimum of, any day guiding, there's a minimum 6 rods in the water. There's a lot of times where it's 9, there's times where it's 12, and there's even, the odd time where there's 15 rods that we're running off of a 219 Lund, right? Like a 22-foot boat essentially. And I'm running, 15 rods by myself. But the play for us is, it makes it a lot easier due to the fact that our fish we're able to catch them for whatever reason. The super shad is still the bait. If you're going to have one bait to run out there, it's going to be a super shad. And the beauty of that is that when you have all your lures are consistent on one side or the other of your boat, is that all your boards are going to pull evenly, and you're not going to get a mix where one board sank back because that lure's pulling more, and then this or that. Your boards aren't staggered that way, so it makes you you can run a lot of rods and not have to worry about the tangling issue when they're all pulling the same amount of pressure off your planer boards. But the one thing that we do that's a little bit unique, if you look at like other big Great Lakes trolling spreads, is St. Clair, a big trolling operation over there. And those guys, they run a totally different system than we do. They run mast. Everything out there is mast boards and clips. And it was always really interesting, to talk to those guys. Jason Quintano, I think, is the best troller over there. Catfish, another really, really good one. But a couple of those guys over there are just dialed on the trolling stuff. But it's always interesting that they run mast stuff. And that allows you to run, whatever you want for lures, right? That big, giant, massive board out there, you can do whatever you want. But for us, it's really interesting. The attention to detail, the difference between 22 and 25 back on a super shad, essentially can be everything between the difference between 1 bite or 5 bites in a day. And it's so crazy and minute, and it sounds stupid, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but a lot of times I start out my day, we run our boards out. We've got 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. That's my spread. That's how I start my distance back from my board, right? You get, and then you put fire tiger and perch, right? Like, and then just from there, you establish a pattern every single day, right? You can take the prior day information and go into that day with it. But if you're starting out, if I'm just getting home, say I just got back from Northwestern Ontario, jumping right into trolling, I'm going to start my morning, half fire tiger, half super shad, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, whatever it is, right? I really like 28 is a really good number for me. But anyways, you'll get one board that fires, and generally whatever line amount it is and color it is, at the first bite you can't make a pattern off of one bite, right? But once you can put pretty good odds that your second bite that day is going to come on essentially same line length. I think is almost more important than color. You could argue one way or the other depending on the day, but really important regardless. But it seems like that 5 feet, which in a depth chart on a super shad is 6 inches. But that seems to make a difference for us, and that's where the Great Lakes guy, the St. Clair guy, is running a mast. You don't have the control with your depth when you're running a mast, and you've got the big line that runs out, and your clip's running off of it. They don't know exactly where their line's hitting the water, and then how much line they have from from where it's hitting contact with the water to the bait itself.
So do you think it's the depth the super shad is running, or is it getting a subtly different action on the bait based on line length?
I think it's a depth thing.
Depth thing, yeah.
I really think so.
Huh.
Yeah. It's super interesting, and I'm sure but like you can talk to we fished with Kyle this weekend, and I can guarantee you'd say the same thing.
Yeah, you guys have handled lots and lots of big muskies, so
Kyle more than me.
Certainly not going to question that. So, you guys are running. What are the boards that you're running, and do you modify those at all for the muskie program?
Yeah, we just I just have a bin full of offshores in my boat.
The big boards, or just
no,
the
small ones?
Really?
Yep. The small ones. Just due to the fact that the super shad doesn't overpower those. And I would say another thing about our fish is generally they have very small, strike zones, right? So even if I spread out 6 super shads, even with the small boards, there might only be 15, 20 feet between boards, but there's plenty of fish that slip in between 2 of my boards that don't bite. And there's some days where it seems like you have to run that board right over top of that fish. But the only, I would say, and it's interesting too, there's some days where, your inside boards are hot depending on, and that generally goes based, what we've come to conclusion on is based off of the propulsion from your kicker. And if they like the sound of the boat or they don't like the sound of the boat, that'll also come into play if you're going to run down rods or not. That's weather based and more so wind based. But, the offshore thing, the only upgrade I make to them is just, the upgraded clip on the front. I still run the same clip in the back, but just I forget the number on the clip, but it just, the pin flips up. Yeah, the black one that flips up, and there's actually a peg that goes into a hole. And I double wrap everything. I think I double wrap the front clip, double wrap the back clip, leave a little bit of slack in between so that the board can do the work.
That back clip, is there a pin in that back clip then too? So you're never dropping boards.
Never dropping boards.
Yep.
No. And I've lost plenty of boards too. I mean, you're going to lose them at times. You get a fish that buries a board, but also with the smaller boards, if the fish do bury them, there's not nearly as much pressure on that fish as well. And odds of ripping hooks out. As our fish, I don't think I've ever had to cut hooks on a super shad.
That's just amazing. You would think, you guys are catching huge.
Some of the biggest muskies in the world, right? But it's
a 6-inch.
They can swallow it. I know they can. They can, but they don't. They are, even with our, the amount of hooks that I cut in Minnesota and Canada compared to like Green Bay is just astronomical.
Huh.
We don't, our fish nip so much. If it's a pressure thing, if it's whatever it may be, but they love to nip.
That's fascinating. And now, what are you doing for line? Are you in a mono or braid on those?
Braid, 100% braid.
Really?
Which is different than the St. Clair guys. Once again, I want that rod to load up quick, and I want to get pressure. I don't want any stretch. There's enough stretch between the rod itself, the amount of line you have out. I do like to run fluorocarbon as far as leaders material, so I play that little bit of stretch. But there's plenty of slack, in my opinion, in the line, especially when you're running 6 boards on each side and your outside board's 250 feet from the boat, right? Like that's plenty. There's plenty of slack and bowing that line from the wind or what have you, that you would want that thing tight. The drag tight, and I want the braid with the no stretch for sure.
That's amazing. So I'm not nearly as experienced as you, but one of the observations that I've had trolling in Minnesota using the big boards is that when I was running pure braid, like I would lose a bunch of fish on that. When I switched to 50-pound mono, it was just like bam, like odds went way up. And my guess would I totally understand what you're saying when you've got the angles of the board and everything, but I think that big board, a lot of times the big fish, they sink it and they're throwing it. And I think that rubber band of that mono between the big board and the bait is kind of what's saving your bacon versus all of a
100%. I think the big board sets your hook more than your rod or your drag.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right? Like that, there's so much tension and pull from that board, and there's so much resistance. The board is setting the hook more so than your rod or even your boat. Your boat going forward, in essence, with the board is what's setting the hook on that fish. But then, like I've always been scared of the big boards because if they do sink them, they're in a tough spot. Like that's a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna rip hooks out of a lot of fish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sucks.
Even when we troll bucktails, like I'll troll double tens on those smaller offshores.
Do you really? Yep. That's cool how you guys have that. I just think it's amazing how you got that system. And when you're setting things up, just for people who have never done a spread, like walk through where the rod is positioned in the boat and where that board is relative to the boat and how let's just say you're going to set 3 lines out on each side.
Depends how late I'm running.
Okay.
Either if I overslept or my customers are a little late. But if you want to do it the least headache free, start with your outside rod. Start with, I generally like to run my highest bait on the very outside, get it as far away from the boat as possible. So if I was running 3 rods in the morning, right, I'm going to come in, I'm going to run 10, 20, 30. That's how I'm going to run my spread.
And that's meaning 10 feet behind from the board to the lure.
Yep. And that's not including the leader. So it's 10 feet from where I take the bait off of the hook keeper, right? So I run a 8'4" trolling rods, and I run a 5-foot leader. So say there's even 2.5 feet, maybe 3 feet of line there. But I just run it from where I take the lure off, I zero my clicker, right? So you have 5 feet of leader, 2.5, 3 feet of braid, and that's my zero, right? It's just easier to keep it that way. But then 10 feet out from that point, so in reality, 10 feet back is really 15, maybe 18, 17.5, 18 feet. Put my board on from there, and that's going to be my furthest forward towards the bow rod holder, regardless if I'm putting it in a tree or if I'm just putting it in a rocket launcher or something like that. And then set that one out, and then do your 20, and then do your 30. If you're in a rush and you're like on a spot and you want to get baits out fast and you think there's a window that's going on, I'll just start on the inside and put that first one out 30 feet back, throw the rod out, engage it right away, and just get that bait running. Right? I mean, we're talking a difference of 2 minutes, right? But sometimes 2 minutes is, if you've got a moon or you've got a weather system or you've got, sunrise is a big deal for us. If you want to get them out fast, you can start with that inside rod. It comes in more so trolling bucktails, especially when, it takes so long to get your baits out due to having to feather that lure out there with all the weight that's accustomed on the bait. Even when I run bucktails, I'll generally start with my inside and get that bait out because it can take me 5 to 8 minutes to get my outside board set. Whereas I can have 2 baits already running in 5 to 8 minutes if I start on the inside. But
and
you
that's
got to be careful.
You engage. You want to make sure the blades are spinning as you're.
Blades are spinning. We're generally trolling over some weeds. We're generally pretty shallow. Say we're 6 to maybe 10 feet is a deep set for blades.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to really feather that thing out there and make sure it doesn't hit bottom and you don't mess up your bait. So it takes time to get a bucktail out 200 feet when you're feathering that thing with your thumb. So when I'm running bucktails, I put out the inside board first. I don't suggest it for people that are just getting into trolling or starting because you're way more likely to tangle lines and twist stuff up. But it depends on the baits that I'm running and then the amount of time where I'm at. Like if I'm running a double, I got 2 trips in a day and we're right on moon, or like the day split ends up to be right around that moon period. I want to get back out there as fast as I can and get baits running at the speed and depth desired as fast as I can.
When you're trolling blades, are you doubling up on your swivels, or do you do anything to prevent line twists when you're?
I just have my swivel in the front, and
Okay,
I can't say I've had an issue with line twists. The only issue I get with line twists is and this is something that I kind of came up with was my weed kits with our leaders that we make, and the weed kits are what will actually twist your line a little bit, and it's not the inline ones. Everybody runs the inline ones, and everybody loves the inline ones, and I push the inline ones really hard. But the most important weed kit or weed catcher that we make is the one right behind the board.
Okay, so describe these weed catchers for us here, Doug. Who makes them? Or
okay, so there's a company, Leaders and Lures. They've been in business forever in Rockford, Illinois. Gene Searing, he makes this idea that I came up with. I worked with Gene. I buy a lot of tinsel from and blades and wire and whatnot for making my own bucktails. But I seen this thing in saltwater where these guys were using this almost looked like a grapple to try and keep some grass or any debris that's in the ocean off of their trolling lures. And, the guys have been doing it for a long time with treble hooks. I think, would be a popular. And guys used to take a treble hook, put it in line with their leader, and just cut the hook points off. And it was somewhat of a grapple to grab those weeds. So when I came out with these, I wanted to run them in line, and I wanted to run them in front of our lure. And a lot of the trolling leaders at the time were 36 inches. It was a very popular length for trolling leaders. A long one was 48, right? So we designed these weed kits, and they basically have 4 wires that stick off of them. And then they're all crimped together on one main piece of wire. There's a twist on each one of the wires just for protection. We started them out with them straight, and then Kyle almost lost an eye. But regardless, we put twists on all of them now. And there's a twist where you connect a split ring, and then you get to your, back to your swivel, and then connect to your main line. But then behind it, we made 5-foot leaders. 5-foot leaders, fluorocarbon is what, we make them all, but all the different leader materials. What fluorocarbon is what I primarily run. But we made them a foot longer, even 2 feet longer than the common trolling leader, just to, if in case you had some weeds up on that weed catcher in front of your lure, there's a little bit more separation between them, right? So that fish wasn't seeing a big clump of weeds and it didn't look unnatural. But the biggest thing is the one that's the most important is what we call the snap-on weed kits. And the snap-on weed kit is the same exact 4-prong system. It's I like to run them just with a 1 ounce weight on the bottom, so it kind of keels it. But those I run 5 feet behind the planer board. And what that does is 95% of your weeds are floating on the surface. Very few of your weeds are actually floating in the water column. So what happens is your planer board, that offshore, will grab a bunch of floating debris. You'll get a bunch of weeds up on your offshore. But anything that your offshore doesn't get hits your line and then runs down your line. Well, I want to eliminate having a ball of weeds 5 feet in front of my bait. So we put on just a small offshore red clip, the heavy-duty red clips. Put that on to our inline weed kit, snap that 5 feet behind it, and then any weeds that get past that first planer board get caught on our inline weed kit, or our snap-on weed kit 5 feet behind the board. And when you have it 5 feet behind the board versus, say, we're running 30 feet back in a super shad, you're going to have that, once you get more weeds in that weed catcher, it's going to pull up in the water column, right? The drag is going to lift that, and that can change where the depth your bait is running and affect how deep you want your lure to run. So I would rather have that change happen 5 feet behind my planer board versus 5 feet in front of my bait, or 30 feet behind my planer board, where it's going to bring that bait up out of the strike zone of where I think those fish are at, because we talked about how important that 6 inches can be, right, where that bait's running. But like I said, the inline one we sell 10 times those that we do the snap-on, but the snap-on is the most important one. But that's the one where we run into line twists, because sometimes you'll get a bigger weed on one of the 4 pieces of grapple, and then it'll roll eventually, and then just roll and roll and roll and roll and roll.
Yeah. That sucks.
That's the part that sucks. But what do you do, right? Like we have swivels built in, right? We have swivels built into the weed kits themselves, and the clip actually goes to a swivel. But when you can't stop it from rotating. No. But it gets you bites. Like it's so effective as far as keeping your baits clean. And there's days where, in the past, and even now, like once you get your spread set out, if you're running into the weeds or you're dealing with weeds, if you want to catch fish, you're not sitting down at all. You're checking 8 rods. As soon as you're 9 rods, you get your 9 rods checked, you start over with rod number 1. Like if you want to get bit where there's all those floating weeds around, whether the wind switched, the current switched, any of that stuff, it's work. Trolling is 10 times the amount of work than casting.
Yeah, especially when you're the captain, first mate.
All of it.
Entertainment.
Yeah, entertainment, net man, you name it.
Right, so.
Wear a lot of hats.
That's cool. I love the technical aspects of trolling. A lot of people think trolling is boring, but if you're captaining multiple lines, like it's entertaining, it's engaging, you're always thinking about, there's a lot going on, and it's really a technical. It's
super technical. Yeah. I'm definitely a fan of the casting stuff, don't get me wrong, but my favorite trolling is the shield trolling. Oh, for sure. Like the contour trolling, especially like when we fish in your boat on Leech, like that stuff where you're contour trolling and you can add so many other elements into it with the kicker would be amazing. So.
Yeah. Speaking of Leech, we did. Yeah, that was the first time we fished together. It was actually up on Leech, and of course that's a really special place for me. I my family's got a cabin in that area, so I fished up there my whole life. You seem to spend a lot of time in the Leech Lake area, and being from out of state, what is it about that Leech Lake area that's so appealing to you?
Oh, the natural fishery, I think, is so special. Just the fact that, some of the best natural reproducing muskies in the state of Minnesota, and that's where it is, right? Like Leech and the Mississippi River, that whole system is the mecca of naturally reproducing muskies, and that's such a special place. it's a higher volume deal, I would say, is what drew me there. The beauty of Leech Lake muskies is they get big just about everywhere, just based off the strain. So I didn't really have to look at it and say, like the state of Wisconsin. I mean, your best shot at a 50-incher is every single person will tell you Green Bay, right? Where you can argue in Minnesota, there's a handful of different lakes, and they're spread out around the state, right? Which is a very special thing I think about the Leech Lake strain of muskie, is that they do get big in most places that they are, right? Mm-hmm. It's a cool area. It's something different. I used to fish vermilion a lot. I still love vermilion because you have that shield aspect to it as well. But the little bit of time I would say I get to spend in Minnesota, I do enjoy coming to this part of the world.
Yeah, Leech is a super cool, and Leech is obviously an amazing lake, and it's a big body of water, but there is, like you said, that area is like the epicenter of native musky waters in Minnesota.
So
I mean,
special.
it's, if you've got a really rough blow day, like you have plenty of options. If muskies are your thing and you want to fish a different lake that's not so windy, within a half an hour, you've got really great options. And so I've talked to a lot of people who think they've got to come to Leech, that they had a blow day or the weather was bad, and they feel like, well, this is my shot at a big fish is Leech, but there's big ones around there too. All around Leech. So, and Leech is just, it's so cool. And I just love the fish out there, those spotted leopards, man. They're just beautiful. They're just beautiful, awesome red fins, and they're super, super sweet. So yeah, man, it is, I agree. I think it's a really, really special place for sure. So, one of the things we slightly touched on was Musky's favorite food, the bucktail.
Yeah.
And I got to see some cool spinners that you guys had in the boat this year. But kind of go through, do you have a strategy on when you're throwing the staggers, or when you might throw a single, when you might throw a double? Like, I've got all these weird things in my head when I'm throwing different bucktails for different things, but I'm kind of curious to peek inside your realm of how you're choosing the right spinner for the day.
Yeah, there's always I think we've all learned from people, and one person that's been a huge mentor in my life is Ron Strand, and he is an absolute wizard, and I think he is king when it comes to finding a bucktail that muskies will eat, and finding small modifications you can make to your baits. And a lot of the stuff that's in the industry even today by your big mainstream companies, and even a lot of the stuff that I do, is brought back to Luke and Kurt as well. And both of those guys are absolute wizards when it comes to bucktails. I've learned a lot of stuff from the guys, and then I've also have my own theory on some things too. Like, we fish a little bit of different water here and there, but there's so many different elements to a bucktail. That's the beauty of it. You can. Everybody just thinks mainly of color and size. Well, there's so many other factors. There's wire gauge, there's blade gauge, there's clevis size, the clevis style, even
blade thickness.
Yeah, blade thickness, and then what's below your clevis, and there's so many cool factors that go into it. And I don't know. I mean, you might have to ask more of a specific question, I guess, to pry it out of me.
I don't know. Let's just talk bucktails for a little. Yeah, I mean, I tend to, if I'm going to favor something, I like light wire for the most part. I mean, I like a really lively blade. I know there's time. So for people who don't know, a thinner wire shaft is going to give your bait a lot more just action. It just feels livelier. And the same with a thinner blade. So most musky blades are going to be 25 or 40. And so the 25s are going to be thinner, lighter. So I kind of like that. I just, whatever it is. And I know that there's times when running a really heavy frame with a heavy blade where that's a lot damper, they like it. But I like tend to like lively stuff.
So it's going to go back for me of where I'm fishing. There's definitely different places I've seen throughout the years of, certain areas or bodies of water prefer, that heavier gauge stuff that you talked about, or the standard stuff I would call is 025, and the thin stuff I would call 018. And then, but our Green Bay fish in the summer really like that heavy, 072, 062 wire, and then those 040 blades. They like a lot of that stuff where, you're, like you said, that noise and vibration is really dampened down. It's a lot lower pitch sound in the water. And then the flip side of that, in the spring on Green Bay, I like the really lively bucktails. I like the super thin wire. I tie. I think, do you tie with 174 or 325
For the
main shaft?
of the bucktail, well, I use
Like an 041.
I'll use like 35, 40. I'm not talking pound tennis, so 35, 40, 51, or 62 are the four.
So I think, I don't know what I want to say the diameter on 325 pound AWF wire, I think it's like 0.31.
Yeah, it's super thin.
Super thin.
Yeah, by compared to a standard bucktail.
Standard
wire.
bucktail 051 is your standard bench
Yes.
line.
Yep,
051
yep.
wire, 025 blades. That's your standard
Yep,
bucktail
yep.
on the market. Then you can vary, above or below that. I tie a lot of stuff with that 325 pound wire,
Yep.
which is, like you said, 031, something like that. But then small, like on that stuff, I do like small clevises, number 6s. They spin a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thinner blades, that 018, I really like the 018 blades. Or an 025. But in Green Bay, definitely in the spring, I like the super light wire, super thin blade, small, compact, single bladed stuff. A lot like what you're throwing, 2 days ago in the boat. I like a lot of that stuff there. Green Bay in the summer, I like the heavier gauge wire, thicker blade stuff, a lot lower pitch sound. Lake of the Woods, Northwestern Ontario, it varies. And I'm lucky enough where I get to spend enough time up there where I can see trends. And there are, in say the 6 weeks that I'm there, 90% of my bucktail fishing is an 8, stagger of some sort, whether 8-9 stagger, IC7, IC9, or 9-10 stagger. But there's definitely times where, other baits come into play or other bucktails come into play outside of that. And there's times where, they'll swim around any other bait to go and eat, one specific different bucktail, I swear. But I like the heavy gauge stuff up there too, but I also like the really thin stuff. You just have to keep testing and just playing around. And I feel like that's kind of my job in the back of the boat a lot of times is I generally have a guy that, generally the front of my boat is going to be IC7 or 8-9 stagger, say in the summer. And then kind of maybe that crankbait or, dive and rise or maybe even a rubber lure in the middle of the boat. But then in the back of the boat, if I'm going to throw a bucktail, I'm either going to throw something really big or I'm going to throw something that's just based, maybe different clevis setup or blade thickness. All that stuff.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about Luke too, and so we're talking about bucktails in the summer here, and I was guilty of this for years, and I remember talking to Luke, or maybe we were fishing, and it was like he was talking about throwing bucktails into October, like late, and I was kind of thinking, it's, bullshit, but it's Luke, so you can't really do that. And I started doing that, many, many years ago. And man, I'm telling you, like a big blade, like I like throwing big stuff. You like throwing, but even like into October, slow rolling 12s, 13s, that kind of stuff that's heavy, gets down deep, and that thing's just creeping along like they lunch bucktail. I mean, there's not many times of year when they won't eat those things.
For sure.
They'll
always bite a bucktail. Like one of my favorite lines from Kurt is they will always bite a bucktail. You just have to find the right one.
Sure.
And that can be, there's a million different variables that we just talked about and different combinations you can make to find one that they want to eat. They're always willing to bite a bucktail. You just have to figure out what one they want. And a lot of times, it can be a standard one you can buy off the shelf, but it more often than not is one that you make yourself.
Sure. Or you just buy one and you slightly modify it.
One way or another, right? I love, like I said, that, and I think
That's a good line.
The benchmark, and I think Luke would even go colder than this. I know he would, but I would say like 50 degrees is kind of the benchmark for me. Once you get below 50, my blades are pretty much put away. I think, what were we fishing in Eagle the last time we were up there? Was that like 54?
Yeah, it was still in the mid 50s when we were up there. Yeah.
And you had the whitest muskie I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, and I totally botched it.
Oh, no. Oh, the big yellow one. Oh, my God.
Not have let her eat right there. I knew better. I got excited. I could never get him in that corner, and I let her eat there. She was just wild. Brian was kind enough. He's right there. He was kind enough to not put that in the show because it was not fine.
Oh my God.
It was just
Send
a
me
beautiful.
that
Everything worked
video.
out perfect, and I totally failed.
I need that
Doug
video.
rolled his eyes and shook his head.
No, I
It's,
did
no,
not.
no.
I felt
It was
bad
cool.
for you. It was the whitest muskie I've
It was
ever seen in my
really
life.
cool. Yeah, and it ate a big bucktail, and it was
Double 12s.
October. Yeah.
Double 12s, black.
Yep. But one of the things that I've discovered though too, with bucktails is that, especially as to your point that you got to find what they'll eat, is so often anglers when they're fishing bucktails, they're fishing within 6 inches or whatever, 1 inch to maybe a foot below the surface, like only fishing the top part of the water column. Like I would definitely recommend starting to weight bucktails, and not weighting them so they're like real heavy in the back, but spreading that out so you can still get a flat running bait. But you start slow rolling those things and you can get those baits down 4, 6, 8 feet. Like muskies don't see bucktails 8 feet down very often, and
Spinnerbait's pretty good at doing
the
that.
spinnerbait's really good at doing that, obviously. Yeah. But, well, I wasn't aware of some of the cool spinnerbaits until this weekend that can move, have the big garbage can lids that you can still like push tons and tons of water at too.
Those blue waters are sick.
Yeah. So can you talk about those or no?
I
don't want to.
I can. I mean, I can't take credit. I mean, Kyle is more of the spinnerbait guy than myself, but I'm going in line with. I mean, you can do a lot of really cool things with a spinnerbait. Just like it's just a different form of a bucktail.
Yeah.
It's a different vibration. It's a different sound. You can do whatever you want with it, and you can punish yourself. No different. You can go throw a supermodel, or you can go throw a freaking gong show.
Yeah.
Right. It just depends how much torture you want to put yourself through, and having the right rods. And I mean, you saw the rod. I mean, we're fishing 11-foot rods and super low gear ratio reels on that really big stuff, and there's so much technical stuff that musky fishing has become so much more technical in the last 10 years. But yeah, the spinnerbaits, you can do a lot of different things with them. There's a lot of guys trolling spinnerbaits, and you can get them down 15, 20 feet if you want. And just strap on more lead to that thing, and you can cast them just as deep as well.
Yeah. That's pretty cool seeing those big baits, and I would just have to say that like gearing of reels, like people should definitely be keenly aware of this. Is that when you look at a gong show in your case, which is a big spinnerbait that has huge, 10, 12, 14 size blades on them or whatever, that pulls really hard. Or if you're looking at a supermodel, like when you see that, when you were to make a cast with that with like an 8-gear reel, you're going to say that absolutely sucks, and there's no way that you could fish that for more than like 4 casts. But you put a 5-gear on there and like, and you're not trying to rush it. Like you're just taking your time, going easy. Like it's actually manageable. Like you can absolutely do that. So when you're going to pull that big stuff, you got to think low gear ratio reels.
And it's for pulling it is low gear ratio, but for casting it is a big battle too, especially if you don't want to, if you don't want to crash a spot or get in too tight, or you got a guy in the front that's throwing an IC7 that's got a 1 ounce weight on, he can throw that thing 160 feet.
Sure.
You don't want to be able to not reach the structure because you're throwing some big giant bladed, bucktail IC12 or supermodel or gong show, whatever. So having that, those custom rods that get built from Thorn, or you can kick them out to 11 feet long, it gives you so much more tip speed and so much more power, and just ability to cast them either into the wind or just that blade catches so much air that you need that longer, more of an mechanical advantage with just the longer lever to get that lure out away from the boat and up to the same piece of structure that the rest of the people in the boat are casting to.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you can get really good at the boat with those things too.
Yeah, big time. Like your 8s, I mean, those big spinnerbaits are super hard to 8 because that big blade is just, and you don't want that thing to stall out, but it takes so much more room to keep that blade going, and that 11-foot rod really comes into play.
I still do have to laugh because it is just like,
I mean, I literally had those rods
like,
built specifically for our trip out east last year.
Sure, yeah.
Like I ordered 2 11-footers, extra heavy stealths, and it was a big player. I mean, out there they love big long profiles. I mean, we're throwing 6-skirted, 8-skirted bucktails with double 12s, double 14s, double 10s, and all that, and then the big giant spinnerbaits, and like you're gonna kill yourself, or you're not only going to wear yourself out, you're also, if you want to not have to make as many casts, cast further, right? And the 5.3 makes it so nice, or the low gear ratio reels make it so nice where you can do it. But if you got to give yourself the opportunity to, with, if you're going to go on a big trip like that and make that, I mean, what's the investment into, one more rod, or, I had a rod for me and I bought a rod for my buddy. And,
Well, and I would definitely agree. I mean, musky fishing is tough. I mean, it just is. I mean, it's just the nature of it. But once you've fished with like good equipment and had a chance to appreciate it, it makes the experience so much better. And cheaping out on musky rods and reels, it is a place you do not want to cut corners. If you can get lighter, more durable, faster. I mean, everything about it is better for a couple $100 more. You spend that couple $100 because after your first day, you're going to be really wishing you had. And all of a sudden,
You're going to buy it again. You're going to go back, and then you're going to upgrade, and then you're going to be into it for twice.
It's amazing.
150% as much.
Yep. It absolutely is amazing. So, the one last thing I want to touch on before we wrap this up is that fishing pressure. So, Green Bay has a tremendous amount of fishing pressure. I mean, Lake of the Woods is getting more and more, but you can obviously escape from it up there. But how do you handle fishing pressure in terms of mentally dealing with it, and then tactics around pressured fish?
So that it's such a two-way question there because of the different places that I fish, because fishing pressure on Green Bay is just it just is what it is. It's the most pressured place I've ever fished, and it makes musky fishing even more mental than it already is. It's such a mental game, and with the Green Bay deal, the approach to it as far as is a little bit different than I would say fishing pressured waters in Minnesota or pressured waters in Northwestern Ontario, is a little bit different. But Green Bay, I tell my guy, I just went through this on opening day this year. You got to put the blinders on as best you can, focus on what you're doing and do what you're doing as best as you possibly can, and really focus on yourself. Don't be distracted by that boat over there just caught one, or that guy over there's figure 8 and 1. Like, if you're saying all these things to me, you're not focused in on what you're doing. I need you to put your blinders on. I need you to focus on the task in front of you and just put in the work, put in the time, put in the effort, and you're going to get your shot. But you can't be distracted by all these other things that are going on around you, or this guy's kind of close, or that guy's bait just landed right behind me, or whatever it may be. There's so many distractions that come with fishing in a crowd of boats. So the one thing that I tell it with my guys in the bay, I just tell them, you got to put the blinders on. Don't worry what's going on around you. If a guy catches a fish next to us, that's a good thing, right? We want to know that they're biting, because there's more than one here, and we want them to be biting. We don't want no one to be catching anything. We want there to be fish being caught. We just have to make sure that you're putting yourself in a good position. You're throwing the right lure. You're throwing the right color. You're throwing a handful of different variables that come into the play of what our fish generally eat on Green Bay. There's a handful of baits, a handful of colors, and I want you to be throwing those baits at all times, so that when that window opens, you're going to get an opportunity, you're going to get a chance, and odds are you're going to get a bite. Versus, when I would say dealing with fishing pressure in Minnesota, like we had this weekend, you're like, holy crap, look at all the boats out here. And me and Kyle are kind of chuckling to ourselves, right? Like, this is nothing. There was eight or whatever it was, other boats in the bay that we were fishing. We were kind of chuckling about it, but then, that's something where we talked about, in the spring, a lot of times you got to throw the smaller baits or this and that. Where Minnesota for me has always been something where you want to be different, and then musky guys always talk about, I want to be different, or all these. You go back to Green Bay, there's 20 boats throwing bucktails. I want to throw a dive and rise. Well, I hate to tell you, buddy, but the odds of you catching one on a dive and rise is pretty slim. I want you throwing a good bucktail, a right bucktail, the right color, so that when the window opens, you get an opportunity. Whereas in Minnesota, I think that plays in a lot more of doing something that's truly different, or throwing a different lure, or throwing a bigger lure, or having a slight modification in your bucktail that can make the difference between what these fish have already been seeing a bunch, in order to get one to bite. So it changes depending on where I'm fishing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then Lake of the Woods, or Northwestern Ontario, I mean, fishing pressure is, we chuckle about it, right? Because we have friends up there that are like, oh man, there's so many boats, and there are more boats. Do not get me wrong. I'm not discrediting that. But what people up there call fishing pressure isn't pressure. It's definitely changing the fish, and you can see that there's definitely things you can do, and that's when a little different definitely comes into play for me. Again, like similar to Minnesota, doing things a little bit different. For me, it's a different style of bait, in my opinion, up there. But you can make plenty of small adjustments with bucktails, or modifications to your top waters. Getting a little bit off the beaten path for me in Lake of the Woods, it's more bait selection for me there versus where I think of, Minnesota. It's a little bit more maybe secondary spots, and even Canada it can be secondary spots for me too. Like everybody comes in and they all know that this point's good or this rock pile is good. Well, that's great, but like if that fish is sick of getting a bucktail thrown over its head every 2 hours, right? Where else could that fish go in a relatively close area? Something that might not look nearly as good, but it's really easy for that big giant muskie to just go, I'm just going to go hang out over in this rock point, or I'm just going to go sit over in this little sand cup for a little bit, or I'm just going to stay away from that and go over here and sit on this deep hump. Mm-hmm. So I think secondary spots come into play a lot for me in Canada, as well as the small bait modifications. But Minnesota for me is definitely more of something different. And Green Bay is just, sorry, buddy, you just got to grind it out. I'm going to give you a bucktail. I might have you throw this for 8 hours, and you might not take it off. I'm sorry. But I know that this has been the bait, this has been the color, this has been the deal, and you just have to trust me.
So window specific.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I mean, and I think that's just good advice. I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, it's cool to look at these secondary spots, play with different lures. But I think one of the key things to muskie fishing, though, is, like, have a good lure and just throw it a ton. You can do a lot worse things, in my experience, than to just pick this up, throw it for forecast, pick this up, throw it for 20 minutes. Like, this is a bucktail that has caught lots of a black and nickel bucktail.
Yep.
Like, you can do a lot worse things than just spend your whole trip throwing that. If you've never caught a muskie and you want to get one, just like do that lots. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it just works.
Well, they're just like, man, like, God, this thing looks like crap. Well, yeah, it looks like crap because it's been chewed 10 times in the last 6 days, right? Like, keep throwing it.
Yeah.
It looks like crap. You're throwing it until the blades come off of it.
Yep.
And if you don't, I'm going to give it to the guy next to you, and if he doesn't want it, I'm going to take it, and then you're going to get the net. Like, I've had it happen so many times, and Green Bay is a mentally exhausting place to fish. It's the second most mentally, to me, St. Clair was the most mentally exhausting place I've ever fished.
Just the vastness of it, or?
Yeah, there was just so little for structure, and when I was there, I didn't understand all the elements that go into it. I mean, those guys that are good there, Spencer Berman to me is an absolute hammer. Like, that guy is just a wizard. A lot of respect for what he does out there, but I didn't understand all the elements. To me, it was just like, oh, we're just casting a 16-foot flat in the middle of Anchor Bay in November. Like, what? There's nothing. You just happen to come across a school of fish, and like, we would get our windows, and you would literally catch, like, if you didn't, the whole boat did not, unless you caught the one, like, the whole boat did not stop casting. Whoever caught the fish, you stop casting and deal with your fish. If you need a hand from your buddy, that's fine, but do not have that other person quit. Like, keep casting, because those windows out there were so short. Where you can't, like, keep that. There's so many times where you would have a 10-minute window, and it's like you would catch 2 muskies in 10 minutes, right? Or 2 muskies in 4 casts.
Man,
out there, right?
Sure.
On Claire, and I mean, even Green Bay can be that way as well. But the Green Bay is just going back to that. It's a very mentally exhausting place to fish, and it's definitely made me a lot better angler fishing out there and spending so much time out there. And I've been fortunate enough to catch some really, really big fish out there, but it makes me a lot better angler when I go to other places.
I bet it does. Yeah. That's cool. And you get to handle some really, really big fish out there.
There's some special ones. Yeah, we've got some special ones over the years. I've been fortunate enough to catch some really big ones. And one thing that we didn't really talk, we just kept it so much to muskies because that's our favorite fish. But I think multi-species guys are, in my opinion, make much better anglers than just one-trick pony.
Well, that's what you're doing that, right? Spring.
Yeah. I mean, once muskie season comes around, but I think understanding other species and how they move and their patterns and like all the smallmouth and walleye fishing I do and lake trout fishing too. Those species definitely aid in just understanding what they do and what else they do in the system that kind of brings everything as a whole ecosystem or food chain together. Mm-hmm. Being a multi-species angler, I think, is something that a guy that can catch them across multiple different species is really special in my eyes.
Yeah,
that takes a lot of talent.
I think it's great I would encourage anybody to venture out and try new. There's just so many things you pick up in angling, fishing for this that you could apply for fishing for that, and fishing here would work over here. Yeah, it's just totally just makes you an all-around better angler. Well, Doug, I think we're getting a little long on time here. So before we say goodbye, tell us how people can find you if they want to book a trip, check out some of your media. Go for it.
Basically, Doug Wegner fishing across any of the platforms you can find me. We one thing that's really cool and unique that we do is our membership platform that we have on YouTube. We put out specific muskie content once every Wednesday. So that's something that, I encourage a lot of, especially new musky anglers to look into.
Yeah, and I'll give that props on that too, and that I'm fortunate to be friends with Doug, and I learn a ton. I've been musky fishing my whole life, and you have taught me a lot of cool stuff. Well, dude, you're on the water way more than I am, and you get to experiment, and you're really, really good at it. So it's cool. So I would definitely encourage anybody to check that stuff out, because it is so often in musky fishing, it's the little things that make all the difference in the world, and there are little things that make you just go, aha. It happens, right?
Little things catch big things.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So, well, thank you, Doug. Appreciate you coming. And behind you, you can see we got you, a little fresco there. So these are magnetic photo tiles. Peel them off. You can replace them. They're relatively cheap. So
I can take that with me.
yeah, man. We got that for you. So
That's cool. That's my biggest Lake of the Woods muskie.
yeah, that's sweet. That's a real beauty, too.
Awesome fish. Snow on the shoreline. Caught it on a tube. Love it.
Life is good. Life is good up in Canada. So, well, anybody who's watching this on television, you can check out the extended version of this on YouTube and listen to it wherever you hear podcasts. Thanks for coming, Doug. Really appreciate it, man.
Super fun.
Yep. Awesome.